Happy Sunday, everybody. Today I have a remarkable human being and new friend, Jen Ferris. And, Jen Ferris and I actually met Jen before she met me, which is a little silly, but I saw Jen at Date with Destiny this past December. And it was after I was food team captain, so I was behind the scenes, but I really wanted to do the incantation walk, which is one of my favorite parts of Date with Destiny. And I found myself standing right next to Jen and just walking with her and saying, Ho'oponopono prayer. And it was just a completely different experience than I've experienced previously. And I was happy to be in her presence. And I don't know, I felt like I don't know if it's a vibration or whatever it was towards you. I was too shy to say hello. But then I'm looking at the screen in the crew room and I see Jen and Tony talking and Jen sharing her story with him. And I was like, oh my God, and just you're like, just the whole, I think it was one of my favorite, I guess they call them interventions, but it was really like almost an interview with you because you were just so, like, you showed so much gratitude and it was just meant, and it was beautiful. Can you share a little bit about how that experience was for you?
Thank you. Yes, it's nice to be here with your audience. I've viewed some of your past episodes, and it's quite a privilege and an honor to be in the same space as some of your dear friends and your family members. So thank you for that.
Love you.
And yes, of course. And before I start, I also want to pass along greetings to you and their love from mutual friends of ours, John and Laurie Burgess, who do pass along their love and their fond memories of you. And want to be remembered to you. So,
beautiful people.
The Tony Robbins.
I've already cried thinking about them. So
that's exactly it. So the Tony Robbins Seminar called Date with Destiny. It was a shock for me. The whole experience is still so incredibly surreal. I have no idea what it was for, why. But at any rate, God made it happen that I share my origin story with Mr. Tony Robbins and the rest of the participants who were there, and of course the crew, such as yourself.
Beautiful.
And well, we were at the point in the seminar where we were talking about our earliest memories, and it's one of his teaching tools and his techniques to really help us to find empowering meanings to sometimes really hurtful events that we go through in life. And it's a beautiful kind of an exercise to take other people's perspectives on the event. And my earliest memories that I shared with the people, with everybody in that room, was how I was left. I was born, first of all, in India, in a southern village in rural India. Let me start that again. I was born in southern India, in a rural village outside of Coimbatore, Tamil Nadu. And I remember living in our village, and it was all made of straw huts. And there was one day that my aunt and I left the village. And
what was your aunt's name, just so I could think of her?
I don't know.
Sorry. Okay.
I don't remember any of my family's name. I remember my name. I was born as Tangamani.
Tangamani.
Yes. And it means golden pearl in Sanskrit.
Wow.
And so my aunt and I walked away from the village, and we eventually came to a T intersection at a crossroads. And at this T intersection, there was a bus stop and a bench, and my aunt asked me to wait there for her while she went to relieve herself. And so I did, and I grew very bored after a while of waiting there, and you listen to the sounds of the street, and I heard the children playing in the schoolhouse behind me. I hear the merchants in the market like selling their tea and spices. And I'm also hearing the sounds of what I know now to be like an old-fashioned typewriter.
Cool.
And well, it loses its appeal, the sounds of the street, when I'm about 3 years old.
Wow.
And I get bored, so I just start exploring my environment. I explore the bench, I count the boards, I count all the screw holes holding the boards together. I balance on the bench and first on the seat, and then I balance across the backrest. And then the bench, of course, loses its appeal for a 3-year-old very quickly, and I start exploring around the bench, and I discover gravel stones and grass, and I encounter the wall of the schoolhouse. And meanwhile, I'm mapping out my entire environment. And then when I get back to the bench, then I get bored of that and all the environment, and I decide that I'm going to go after my aunt and go back down the road where we came from. And so I start out, I take a few steps down the road, and then I'm petrified because at that moment I hear the sound of a dog barking. And in India, in the village where we came from, we were taught to fear slum dogs. So out of fear, I run back to the bench and I climb on top, and I'm on the backrest, and I'm crouched there, and I'm screaming and crying. And a police officer comes to my aid, and he asks me, why am I screaming? Why am I not in school? And I tell him I'm waiting for my aunt, who has gone to relieve herself. And well, he looks into my badly deformed eyes, and he knows exactly the scene that is playing out before him. And he gives me the benefit of a doubt, and he waits with me for a while on the bench, and we talk. And after a while, we're walking down the road together, that same road that my aunt and I had come down. And I'm holding his hand, and we're chattering away. And my next memories are of us boarding a bus. And after that, I have flashes of memories of being in the Families for Children orphanage. And well, I guess it's only about 6 months later that, well, maybe about a whole year later, I arrived in the orphanage in November of 1978. And in October 25, 1979, I was adopted to a Canadian couple. And I entered Canada via Montreal.
Wow. And I heard your interview with Hack Mankind with Peter and Jess, and I heard you say it was a Christian orphanage. And that you said, I remember you saying that it didn't, like, it was a beautiful opportunity for your family to adopt you, and it didn't cost that much for you to get to Canada.
Yes, exactly. So it's called the Families for Children Orphanage. It's still in operation today in
Wow.
Pudanur, which is a little village of Coimbatore in Tamil Nadu. And it is a Christian orphanage. And they're no longer doing international adoptions, but they still at that time it is still in operation. And at that time they very much were committed, or they acted on the premise that every child deserves a family. And in both of their orphanages, they have one in India, they have another in Bangladesh,
Oh,
and they they fundraised. They did a lot of fundraising and got a lot of charitable donations and support from the federal government to keep the barrier of adoption, the financial barrier for adoptions, low, so that it made it more feasible for parents, or for people to adopt internationally and build families. And yeah, it was a hardship for my parents, who had 4 children already at home. They had one expected from the same orphanage that I was at. She was expected to come, and every time she came, she was scheduled to come into Canada, she was ill. She kept getting ill with fever and diarrhea and coughs and the like. So, and at one point in time, tuberculosis was going through the orphanage. And so the officials kept denying Ronnie entrance into Canada on account of her illness. And I was presented by Mummy Sandra Simpson, who's the operator of the Families for Children Orphanage. I was presented to my parents, Ronald and Janet Ferris. And well, I mean, they were shocked at that alternative, at that possibility, because they wanted their daughter, Ronnie, who, she was already so much part of the family. She was engraved in their hearts already. And
wow.
so it was a tough decision that they had to make, but they answered the call, and they called back Sandra, and they said, well, we want our Ronnie, and as soon as she's strong and able, we want her on a plane out of India home into our arms. And as for the blind child called Tangamani, we'd like to start adoption procedures
Wow.
for her.
That's
So,
probably
and
the best decision they ever made.
it was a good decision, but I mean, a difficult decision, because how do you, like, they've had to, take out a loan from the bank. They've had to borrow money from their parents. They've had to sell the family cottage, and
Wow.
it was a hardship. Like at that time, my father is an Anglican minister at that time, and so not a lot of money to be raising 6 children, and then to also be having to fund these international adoptions. So,
But don't
but
you think that money is just energy? And all the good energy that they were putting out, just it made it work.
yes, they made it work, and God made it work for them, I believe. So, so yeah, I'm eternally grateful. Like I could never have imagined that my younger sister would have to be sick so much, and like she had to get sick and so many times in order, just until I arrived into the orphanage, and then for God's grace to also touch my parents and just say, yeah, take this child and we'll make it work. And so it happened that way. And it's true that I cannot deny God's grace in my life. For sure, there's been so many instances of his love and his grace intervening in so many areas of my life, from my education to my high school education, my university education, to even my my career, and and then even most recently as at the Tony Robbins Seminar in December of 2019.
Beautiful.
So it's pretty incredible, and I'm astounded, really, and how much I forget how huge God's grace is.
Oh my gosh, yes. And so I want to talk a little bit about when you changed your name and the meaning behind that, and maybe to get to know your grandmothers a little better. Do you have any
Yes,
stories
of
for
course.
us?
Yes. So I was the last girl to arrive into the Ferris family, and excuse me, my parents gave me the name of Jenny Marjorie, and I'm named after both of my grandmothers, um, and who are now deceased and have been for quite some time. But and I arrived into Canada on my maternal grandmother's birthday of October 25. So it's very special to me, and I'm very proud and honored to bear their names. And so my both of my grandmothers really, it's challenging to say too much about our relationship, because when I was um, it was in 1981, in February of 1981, my father was elected to be the Anglican bishop up in Whitehorse, Yukon, which is on the far northwestern part of Canada, right next to Alaska. You guys will know Alaska.
Beautiful, yeah.
And so we moved up there, and so we were quite distant. Like that's about, I don't know, about 7-hour plane ride away from Ontario, where my
Wow.
parents live, and my
Yeah.
grandmothers both lived in Toronto. So moving up north, we really didn't see them a lot. But when they would come up to visit us in the Christmas times or summer times, those would be the times where I would really bond with my grandmothers. And my mother's mother taught me everything I know about cooking.
Cool.
My gram is what my mother's mother was called to us, Gram. She was a tremendous baker. Now, I'm not a good baker. I think it's too precise for me, baking.
I'm
But
with
she
you.
did teach me
We have a lot.
everything I know about cooking, and I so I can cook decently, how to chop vegetables and all of this kind of thing, and just about taste and working around the hot stove. And I think it took a lot of courage for my grandmother to be able to do that, because she was a little bit fearful with me, but she learned and I learned. And also my parents are very hands-off kind of people when it comes to child rearing, so they didn't really believe too much in hand holding me through a lot of my life experiences. So they kind of taught my grandmother how to also just take a backseat approach to when I'm learning and experiencing things, so that I can fully interact in the environment with the things that I need to make sense of everything. So that's the approach that my parents took. They were very good about that, to make sure that I was included in everything, and that I wasn't treated any differently than my siblings and my peers. And so that's how I was raised. And I think most likely my parents probably received a lot of criticism for the kinds of adventures I went on, but there wasn't a whole lot my parents could do to stop me either. And so
That's amazing.
it's just
You're
the way it
definitely
was.
an
Like if I
inventor.
wanted to, sorry, go ahead.
You're definitely an adventurer.
Yes, I guess so. So, but I mean, they raised me to be included and very normalized. It wasn't ever expected that I would be treated differently than my siblings, and certainly not treated as a blind child. Yes, there was definite adaptations that had to be made, but the same expectations for my siblings were held very real for me also.
It's remarkable.
Yes.
I have a question that's like, do you remember a certain food or recipe or something that you love that your grandmother made that maybe I can recreate?
Well, let me see here. My so my my father's mother, so my paternal grandmother, taught us how to make fudge.
Wow, that was my Nana's
Really,
favorite.
yes. And she had very much crafted, like, perfected that craft. Whereas to this day, I still burn the sugar, and it's just I don't make it, and it's like I really can't do that anymore.
I
But
think it's hard to make. I've never tried, but I've heard
yeah,
about
I
it.
guess so. And plus, it's just so much sugar. Like these days now, as an adult, I just don't. I really don't eat a whole lot of sugar. So um fudge and that toffee, my mother's mother taught me how to make English toffee, which I love. And of course she uses all the condensed milk and all of that kind of stuff, and with nuts, but again, a lot of sugar, so I really don't make that kind of stuff anymore. But what I do make that my grandmother, my mom's mom, taught me is to make a broth. My grandmother grew up during the Depression, and so they knew how to hold on, or not the Depression, World War II. My apologies. I guess that would,
Yeah.
yeah. Anyway, World War II, and so they knew how to make use of everything, right? And so she always made stock from bones, and so I
So good for you.
always make stock from bones. And so yeah, I make bone broth monthly, I suppose. And yeah, she taught me how to do that. And
Beautiful.
I eat soups a lot. I'm a fairly simple eater. It keeps my life simple. So, and my grandmother used to make bread all the time when she came up to our house up in the Yukon, up in Whitehorse. But oh man, it's too finicky. And nowadays too, I also don't eat a whole lot of carbohydrates like that. I don't eat a lot of bread. It just doesn't
There's
do well
alternatives
with
though. We
sugar.
could do monk fruit. We could substitute some of those sugars and some of those because I
That would
don't
be.
eat bread. Yeah, that'd be fun.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
Um, one of my friends at the church, the Bible study I was going to, made this coconut bread, and it was so sinfully delicious.
I love coconut bread so
she's,
much.
she's Jamaican too.
Yes.
So,
Chris and I used to get it all the time, the cocoa bread.
yeah,
There's nothing like it.
no,
Honestly, I'm with
not
you
at
on
all.
that. It's so
Yeah,
soft and
and
so
exactly,
just
and
tastes
she
like
serves
love.
it warm, and it's just heaven. It's like a little slice of heaven right here. Yeah.
I love you. I could talk to you all day. So, can we talk a little bit about, because I'm amazed at your intelligence too, and how, you got your bachelor's degree in psychology with an honors, go figure. I mean, you're one of the most remarkable people I've ever met. And then you got your master's in public administration, and you worked for public defense, and now you're trying to modernize security for trans security in Canada.
Um, yes, so talk about my education. Um, it's really incredible how the kind of education that I have, especially growing up in the Yukon. It just so it well, it's in 1981, where at this time, blind children were still going to residential schools and boarding schools, and So it was quite the shift for them. I mean, they insisted on the family remaining together, and so they had an option that I could attend the School for the Blind in Ontario. And they were also informed that there was a School for the Blind up in Vancouver, also Vancouver, British Columbia. But my parents said, no, the family is staying together. And we, they were advised by my teachers um, in Ontario that I could, and I certainly had the capability to go through the public school system if that's the route that they chose. So they did. They insisted that I would go through the public school system. And so they registered all of us children, of course, into the school system. And the school board was scrambling when my parents informed them that they have a daughter who's blind. And well, it's so miraculous. Again, this is just where God's grace just is huge, huge in my life. And there was a woman who had they had recently gotten married, and they had gone up to the Yukon to earn extra money because there's good money made up there. I don't know, there's a lot of government money up there in the Yukon, and it's quite a bit better than in Ontario. So anyway, they were up there in the Yukon looking for work and trying to save up money so that they could go traveling around South America.
Cool.
And this woman saw the notice board for a special education teacher in the campground where they were staying. So she applied and she got the job. And then it was only a few months later, the superintendent of the school comes to her and says, "Don't you have a background working with children who are blind?" And the woman said yes, in fact, that she had been working with the School for the Blind in Ontario, and she traveled and worked for the School for the Blind in New Zealand and the School for the Blind in Australia.
Wow.
And the superintendent says, very good, because we have a family that is moving to the Yukon, and they insist on their blind child going through the public school system, and we need a teacher for the blind. So the woman stepped up, and that's how I became how I was able to get such a good quality education, because she knew the expectations of blind children. And so she taught me Braille. She taught me how to type on the computer, on a typewriter at first, and then she taught me how to use a computer and use screen reading software, and how to navigate around on those days very primitive DOS systems. And then she taught me also how to use a white cane, and just how to familiarize myself with environments. And so I went through the entire school system with my peers, and I graduated grade 12 with all my peers up in the Yukon. I was the first blind child to go through the school system.
Beautiful.
And not only go through the public school system, but also to graduate with my peer group. A lot of times, blind children they're held back quite a bit, and they don't get to graduate with their peer group. But I thankfully did. I was pushed a lot because I did show potential, and there were high expectations for me, both on behalf of my parents and on behalf of my teachers all along my roots. And even so, my first teacher, she had to move on, and they hired a teacher for me that when I needed it. Like, I needed a teacher who was very strong in mathematics, and in order for me to be able to graduate with grade 12 math. and do perform statistics, because they had expectations that I would be going to university. And well, it just so happened that another woman was coming back off of her maternity leave, and her children were getting older now, and she was ready to go back into the labor force. And she happens to have a master's degree in mathematics and advanced mathematics.
Wow.
And she is a teacher herself. So, her youngest is now like 8 and in school full time. And so she needed to work, and so there she was just when I needed her. And, well,
I hear you say that. I hear you say that a lot, and I believe you, and I know that's true.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just a beautiful realization, and that you're conscious of it, because a lot of times people come into our lives for a reason,
Mm-hmm.
and at the right exact time that you need them. And that helps mold us, and just helps us on with our journey. I love that about you.
Right. Yeah, exactly right. And so that's just, that's how it happens. And it's taken a lot for me to acknowledge God's grace in my life. I didn't always see it like that, of course, but it's very real. And even in university, like for my first couple of years, so I went to university, I flunked out. I really did, because I didn't know how to study. Plus, I was first time away from home without my parents. I had a lot of freedoms, and I explored those freedoms to every extent as you can imagine. And yeah, probably a little bit too loose and free.
We all do.
But a lot of that too was because I didn't have textbooks, right? My textbooks were on cassette tape. And when I had to order them. And when I ordered them, they only arrived like 3 months after my courses. So like that was, what else was I to do? I couldn't really study. So I might as well go
have fun.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Probably too much fun. So,
oh, I love that.
Anyway, it's not a very proud moment for me, but at any rate, it was an experience that I had to go through, and I now chalk it up to a rite of passage. And but I smartened up after a while. I buckled down. Well, when I first flunked out of my first couple of years, I took time off, and I nannied for a family that had 3 young children, and very, very young. The youngest was 6 months old. At those days, the mothers were going back to work when the child was 6 months. And so, I was looking after a little girl who was 5 years old. She was in school part-time, like in the mornings, and then in the afternoons we'd have to go collect her. And so she's there. And then there was a 3-year-old boy, and then the baby, 6-month-old baby. So
how was that experience for you?
Very, very good experience for me. And I did that for 3 years. And after a while, like I had to concentrate on my studies, and I had to leave the Yukon, because really it really wasn't a good environment for me. I was mixed up probably with not such good people with good ambitions, high ambitions. So I bid my beloved Whitehorse Yukon goodbye, and went and studied at the University of Victoria. And by this time, it was in 1997 when I went to, or 95 when I went over there to Victoria. So technology was starting to catch up with some of my requirements for studying, and my need for Braille, because I had always studied in Braille. And it's so bizarre, because I'm a tactile learner, but yet so visual. I needed the tactile to be able to map things in my head mentally. And Yet I have a memory for conversations, auditory memory for conversations, but my learning style is very much a visual.
Me too,
So
yeah.
I'm a peculiar case. So I could remember lectures word for word and concepts in the lectures, but then when it came to the textbooks and reading, I had to read it in Braille and then marry up the conversations in the lectures with the textbooks that I was reading. And it just didn't work well for me to read boring textbooks through audio on cassette
I love
tapes.
you.
So dry.
I totally understand that.
And it's so, but yeah, when I started to get my textbooks and get them scanned, and then I was able to print them into Braille, and I was finally on a level playing field with the rest of my peers at the university. And yeah, so I graduated with my bachelor's degree in 2001. It was a lot of hard work.
Mm-hmm.
And I did graduate with my honors, and it was with distinction in that bachelor's of program, Bachelor of Arts with honors in psychology. And what makes it an honors with distinction is I was doing an independent thesis. So I took that route because I wanted to go into psychology. And I believe, like, I was on the track to do clinical neuropsychology.
Mm-hmm.
Child psychology, clinical child
Mm-hmm.
psychology. That was the route I was headed down. And if I didn't get accepted into the master's program for clinical child psychology, my backup plan, my plan B, I guess, was forensic psychology, because I loved that field. I loved the social deviance and social behavioral psychology and drugs and behavior and just like psychology and crime and all of that, and psychological profiling. So those were my career plans. That's what I um, had charted out. That was where I was going.
Mm-hmm.
Well, until I had a rude awakening that a lot of the advanced, like, graduate programs the universities require graduate recruitment exams. It's similar to LSAT and the MCAT and the business. Oh, what is it called for business? Anyway, I
I'm a
forget.
science girl.
Yeah, I forget what it's called for business. But at any rate, so all of those recruitment exams are all like, it's part of weeding everybody out, right? So that's all that it is typically. But I was disadvantaged, I felt, because I didn't have any study material. I didn't know how to study for such
Wow.
an exam. I mean, my classmates were buying study material by the boatloads at the university, at the bookstores, and they were going to the library and they were doing practice tests and reading on concepts and learning how to do logic and how to problem solving questions and if this then that type of scenarios. And they were able to prepare and study, and I didn't have any material available to me. And I did. I couldn't even do any practice tests because they didn't have any practice tests in Braille. And at this point in time, very little was on the internet. I know it's probably hard for a lot of your audience to understand that there wasn't a big internet in those days. But at any rate, in around 2000, there in 2001, when I was preparing for entrance into these master's programs, there was very little support for me to do these graduate recruitment exams, and that was a definite requirement for entrance and for acceptance, was your score on these exams. So I felt I was really disadvantaged and discriminated against, and how could this be, and how am I supposed to study? Like, how can my peers are studying volumes and volumes of practice exams and concepts, and I don't have anything, and I'm supposed to go in there, if you'll pardon the expression, blind, you know. So I really felt hard done by. But then, of course, but I was still encouraged to apply for master's programs that didn't require such exams, recruitment entrance exams. So
What, I don't want to interrupt, but I'm just,
yeah.
so what made you keep going, even knowing all these things are stacked against you?
Well, I was encouraged to do so. I was in a very elite program at the University of Victoria in the honors program, where I was doing an independent thesis, and we were pushed. We were pushed a lot. I was in my group, my peer group. There was only 25 of us who were granted entrance into this elite program for honors.
What was your thesis on?
My thesis was in the area of adolescent. It was done in the adolescent psychiatric ward in the children's hospital in Victoria. And it was on personhood and selfhood, and how do adolescents perceive their notion of self after they've gone through periods of attempted suicide.
Wow.
And does the person still exist? Does that same self still exist? Are person and self the same? Like, how do you process this event? So, yeah, and it was very well received. And so, yeah, that's why I was on that track for clinical neuro child psychology. And so, yeah, so I was pushed. And so, and I graduated with good grades, good marks. And so I still applied, but I applied at the University of Victoria, and I applied for the Master's in Public Administration program, which is business for government. And I applied for that because it didn't require a graduate entrance exam. And I thought, well, this is easy. This should be a shoo-in. It's my home school. There's very minimal requirements, I guess. So, but I was accepted just on the spot. There was no, I applied and I was accepted just like that. And it was an easy process. So thankfully, and yes, so then I went through the business of government courses and all of that, and I thankfully got a job in national defense as soon as I finished my bachelor's degree. And I deferred my entrance into the program so that I could spend some time working. So I graduated in 2001, and I entered the program in 2002, 2003. Yeah, I worked for a few years at National Defense, and I moved to Calgary, Alberta, where I spent a year working, and went back to the University of Victoria, moved back to Victoria and picked up my education again in my master's program. And then I moved, though I went from a full-time program into a part-time program. So I started working full-time for National Defense in their strategic HR planning and programming. And and then pursued my master's degree on a part-time basis in the evenings and weekends.
Overachiever.
Well, so necessary though. And so again, I guess, that was God's grace that intervened in that moment in my career choices, or my university choices also. And after a while, it was in 2010, I finished up my master's degree, and I defended my thesis. And in May of 2010, I moved to Ottawa, where I'm now working for the federal government still. And know I've gone through a couple of departments. I've moved through and progressed through different departments and gained different experiences in finance and human resources, in programming and planning and policy. And so now I'm in policy, and I'm working for Transport Canada, and I'm working on modernizing their transportation security clearance process.
Can you explain a little bit of that and why it's so important to you to help modernize the security for the transit?
Well, having spent 20 years now in the federal government, I noticed disconnects between my academics in government and my work in government. So what our textbooks were saying were common practices for business of government was not the reality in government when it came to, the rubber hitting the road, the way it worked and conceptually and the way it worked in reality, where there was just such a huge disconnect. And for me personally, I found that there's so much. I mean, I think it's pretty much everywhere in a lot of governments around the world, but there's so much waste. There's so much bureaucracy, such a huge burden on red tape and, just nonsense, and so it's important for me that Canadian citizens are getting the absolute best services from their public servants who they're paying. They're paying the salary to deliver high quality service. And that is that's my mission. Well, I don't know if it's a mission, but it's certainly an outcome for me that Canadian citizens deserve and have the right to expect high quality services from their tax dollars, from what they're paying taxes. And we pay a lot of taxes here in Canada, and they have that right to expect a higher standard of service from us as the servants who they entrust their tax dollars and their just their care, their overall general care and well-being for our country. And that was a huge disconnect for me, because I just didn't feel that I was getting good services from public servants when I had the occasion to deal with them as a Canadian. And then I knew why, though. I knew why because the internal workings. I'm from the inside, so I know. And as you and I both know, I mean, we both have the same teacher as Tony Robbins. Like, we're taught to always perform at our highest level and at our best, and put service as a number one priority and a number one outcome for us, right? And
absolutely,
I just could not. I got so frustrated when everything was just bureaucracy and administrative burdens and paper pushing from one to another, like one area to another, without having results. There's a whole lot of busy work going on, but the performance isn't leading to outcomes. It's not leading to results that have tangible impacts for the citizens. And so, yeah, I'm passionate about that. I'm very passionate about that.
We're very lucky to have you.
Well, yeah, so I'm doing my best, one unit at a time. I'm trying to transform. But again, and that's one of the reasons why I have been wanting to go to Date with Destiny for so long. I'd been wanting to attend that seminar since 2014, and it just wasn't the right timing at all. But my number one outcome at Date with Destiny for going there was to learn how to make an impact with my colleagues and learn strategies on how to influence government executives to adopt my ideas for high performance and high productivity. That was my number one reason for going. And well, I met a different kind of a destiny, but I suppose I wouldn't trade it for any of my imaginings.
That is Remarkable.
Yes, quite unexpected. And so yeah, so I don't know, like, you know, and we have that questionnaire that we're supposed to fill out, and I think one of the questions in that questionnaire is, how do you know that you will have achieved your outcome for attending this event? And it's, well, it's not the outcome I went for.
But that's
Or
the
it was
outcome that was
my
in store for you.
it was indeed. And my coach reminds me all the time that I met my destiny. And well, I'm discovering it, or her, I don't know what you call it, or God's plan. And so
Beautiful.
that's how that all comes about.
You have so much history, and you just, there's so much that we could talk about and that you've shared, and I appreciate you sharing your story and your hardships, but there's so much beauty in your life and so much you have accomplished, and so much that value that you're bringing to your company and to this whole community. And I'm just very grateful to be in connection with you, and just, I love talking with you. I feel like I've known you forever. And
thank you. Yes, we're soul sisters.
Absolutely. Sister Jen, can you?
Sister Jen, yeah. My sister Jen and my other sister Jen, right?
I'm going to watch that today.
Yeah, look for it on, I guess it's one of those oldies Saturday Night Live clips on my brother Daryl and my other brother Daryl. I'm Larry, and here's my brother Daryl and my other brother Daryl. It tells you how old I am, Jennifer.
I was talking to my sister about this last night. How I always just assume everybody, whether you're 5 years old or you're 80, I just feel like we're all the same age. I don't know why.
Yes,
It's just this thing in my brain that's, I don't know why. So we're at the top of the hour, and I know the first time we spoke, we ended it in a prayer, and it just really, really touched my heart, and I think you're really good at that. So would you mind maybe ending this call in a prayer for everyone?
Certainly. Thank you. It'd be my honor. It's I'm not used to praying publicly, but I'll just pretend it's you and me.
It is you and me.
And God, I guess.
Yes.
Dear Heavenly Father, we come to you in absolute humility and awe of all the wonders and your glories and your grace in this world. We know, dear God, that you are the creator of all good. You are the maker of all good. And we commit this time and this space and your people up to you, dear God. We know that you will turn every hurt into a good. And at this point in time where there is so much suffering, I do ask for you to find it. And where there is suffering, may you show your grace. Where there is hatred, may you show your love. Where there is weakness, may they know your strength. And where there are people so lonely, may they turn to you and come to you with their open hearts and find your wonders and your grace and your glory. Jesus, if we ask, we know that you are the creator of our plans, and we commit all of our actions to you as we go forth on this day, knowing full well that our plans will succeed when we turn to you. And in our times where there may be a lot of discomfort, a lot of unknowing, may you help us and remind us always to focus our thoughts on things that are true and honorable, pure and right and loving. And may we remember to always think about those things that are excellent and worthy of your praise. We come to you humbly, dear Jesus, and we ask you for your blessing upon us on this day. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Oh, I love you. Thank you so much for everything. And
Thank you. I love you.
you're remarkable. Thank
It
you.
was wonderful spending this hour with you.
Yes.
And your audience.
Yes. I hope that everybody got to see your beautiful heart and all your resilience. And I can't wait to see what you have in store next for us.
Well, thank you. I take it as an invitation to come back. I accept. I thank you for that. If I can serve your community, I'm certainly willing to be here and support you in your work.
Thank you, Jen. I
Thank
appreciate
you.
that. And if there's anything I could do or help, spread good vibes, please let me know.
Thank you. I will. You too.
Okay.
All the best to your community and to you, and blessings upon your day as you go out and conquer whatever you have planned for.
Thank you. Have a good day. Have a
You
good day,
too.
everybody.